beautiful people, and welcome to this week's video. This week I thought it'd be fun to do a little bit of colouring in. I actually did this line work back in September for Patreons as a part of the Patreon pack Bumbles Day Out. So this colouring line art was actually available as that part of that September pack, and I really loved this piece. I never actually got around to colouring it, and I really thought, hey, if I colour this, I can turn this into a print, because I have been working on a shop update which is actually happening next week. For those who are watching the video in the future, you probably already know that the shop update has happened, but I've been working on that all week, and I just needed something that wasn't overly overwhelming for myself. I do often spend quite a bit of time working on video content. It's actually a good half of my week spending on working on videos and trying to create a backlog, but because I just have been a bit busy lately, unfortunately I've not been able to have as much time for video content as I would like, but I digress. This sort of illustration is Bumble visiting 4 different flowers, and I thought it was a perfect representation of the fact that spring is almost here, and I'm so excited for it. In fact, spring is here. It's officially daylight savings time for us in the UK this week, and I am all here for it. I am so excited. If you're probably watching this video in the future, yes, this makes no sense to you at all, but around this sort of time we're having a lot of flowers coming about. The bees are visiting us again, the birds are tweeting, there is just, it's the feeling of freshness and excitement is in the air, and I thought this piece was perfect for that, you know, happy little bumblebee visiting flowers. There are a few different colorways for this. I used clover flowers, roses, sunflowers, and lavender, and these are types of flowers that are very attractive to bees. I did a lot of research actually when I was doing back in September. I was doing a lot of research to see what flowers really are best planted for bees, and these were some of the flowers that came up. I remember I used to have these massive lavender bushes in my parents' garden, and there would always be loads of bees inside there, and I used to just love watching them come up and collect the nectar and go away, and that's sort of my inspiration for the whole piece. The birds are absolutely going crazy outside. They must be having a war or something. They're plotting something. I can definitely hear them. The crows are going crazy. It's a murder. But I digress. I just wanted to colour in and create a happy sort of feel illustration, and that's sort of everything that I've been working on at the moment has been that sort of very happy feeling, which is very interesting because the illustrations I end up drawing for Dungeons and Dragons end up being quite dark in comparison when I'm sketching, so this is really fun. This is very reminiscent of children's illustration, and if you're wondering about the equipment I am using, I will let you know now. I am using a mixed media paper. Mixed media paper is really good if you want to have a mixture of different mediums. It's as it says on the tin. If you want to use a heavy amount of watercolours, I will recommend watercolour paper, but watercolour paper is not best for your markers. What I'm doing here is I'm just creating my flat colour layer. I like to do this with markers. There are very simple techniques that you can do if you want to use a large area. If you want to spread your ink out over a large area, I would recommend using the chisel tip and using circular motions. This will create the smoothest background possible. Also try, and when you are colour layering, try and use midtones in between your lightest and your darkest colours. This will help with blending. You can blend by oversaturating the colours in between, but you will create this sort of pixel weird texture with the paper. It does something weird to the paper which can look really pretty, but it's not often a technique that I would recommend, unless you can't get the specific colour that you're after. Now, I could have just done this with markers and had a illustration that was fairly interesting, but I like to build up a lot of texture with my illustrations. So I'm using alcohol markers here. In particular, these are the Winsor & Newton Pro markers. You may see the old markers, Letraset Pro markers here. This is the old brand version of them. I have a lot of the old branded markers because when they were changing, I went and stocked up and bought a ton of them because they were selling them for like £1 each, and the ink in these is phenomenal. I've had some of these markers for years, and it's quite impressive because I do use them a lot. After I have done my alcohol marker layer, I then go on to watercolors. Now, you can put watercolors down before using alcohol markers, but I don't really recommend doing that because when you put your watercolor down, that already creates a barrier between the paper and the pen isn't able to soak into that paper properly. I actually would say that my favorite technique is to put the alcohol marker down and then put the watercolor on top. And if you've watched my videos for a while, you know this is a technique that I genuinely do enjoy using a lot. This is a way for your alcohol markers to have a little bit more depth and give you that texture within an illustration that you are more interested in. After I've always done my flat layer, I deepen in my shadows with my darker colors, trying to deepen the areas as much as I can before building in texture with watercolors. Watercolors sort of like makes the marker just seem that little bit more, it just gives the marker a little bit more oomph. And because you've already got your vibrant color layer down, hey, you don't have to spend ages building up layers with watercolors. Sort of a fun, cheat way in a sense. And this is why mixed media paper is fantastic for this, because you are already having that layer of alcohol marker down, and then you can build the watercolor on top, and it isn't going to cause much issues. Now, the time that you are going to have issues with watercolor on mixed media paper is if you are building up an awful lot of water, and this is going to cause the paper to buckle. If you don't want your paper to buckle, in particular when using watercolors, it helps to stretch the paper beforehand, and the way to stretch paper is to soak it in water and let it dry. This means that the paper has already retained that water and it is less likely to buckle. In my experience, I've had a lot of water paper buckle irregardless of like how much water, how little water I've used, and it always does depend on the paper quality in general. After doing this, I then go in with my polychromos and Prismacolors, and this helps build up the texture yet again with the watercolors and helps me to deepen those areas. Texture is super important to me when it comes to illustration. I find that it makes an illustration much more interesting. Yet again, with the alcohol markers, I could have just stopped there, but I just love adding that little extra look. I find that sometimes alcohol markers, even if you deepen shadows and you do a lot of different coloring with it, sometimes it ends up too graphical looking for me. And what I like about traditional medium is that I like to see brush strokes. I like to see like texture, and this is just a personal thing. Like, it's just something that I really like doing. But after you can put, like, say you can just have your alcohol marker and then build up your pencil crayons on top. You don't have to have the watercolor stage. I just like the watercolor stage just because, like, for example, look at the little fluffy cloud. Like, look at the textures in that background where the blue is, and all it is me just literally going over very lightly with my watercolor paint and just like dipping blue on there just to create that little bit, like I said, texture is very important to me. After doing that, we are going to lighten certain areas that ended up being a little bit too dark. Now, you do have this problem sometimes, specifically when using like mixtures of mediums. Now, I recommend that when you are using mixtures of mediums, especially with alcohol markers, you want to work from light to dark. And sometimes your light areas will end up being a little bit too dark. So I actually use acrylic pens. Posca pens are fantastic for graphical style illustration, but they're also really good for adding highlights as well, and it's one of the reasons why I do recommend them. There are cheaper versions of Posca pens that are out there that are just as good. I really like the Thule Art pens. I like both Posca and both Thule Art. Thule Art are definitely the cheaper option, but sometimes they sell out very quickly. These are all mediums that I've used for a long time, and if you're here up on this channel, you've know I have gone through a journey to find stuff that really works for me. I've really changed over the 5 years that I've done YouTube, and it's been very fascinating to see how my traditional journey has grown. I am working on trying more traditional things. I've learned that acrylic paint really isn't for me, but acrylic pens work because it's for that happy medium between what I want with alcohol, markers and paint. I've really grown to love watercolor over the years, and I've really grown to love pencils and adding more texture to my illustrations. It was one of the reasons why I stopped doing digital art so much, was because it just felt off. And I'm really glad that I learned a lot with traditional, because I now apply that to my digital art. I actually use a lot of texture brushes when it comes to digital art, just because I love that look. I've come to realize that. And this coloring this in made me realize, like, I don't always enjoy coloring. It's actually something I put off a lot because I love inking. But, you know, sometimes coloring can be fun, and it's about finding what works for you. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you've enjoyed a little bit more into my techniques and what I do. I know this was a little bit of a quick video. I just wanted to colour and have fun. I think the sunflower is my favourite part of the illustration, but you'll have to let me know which is your favourite. Clover, rose, sunflower or lavender? Let me know in the comments section down below. And what is your favourite medium to use? I would absolutely love to find out. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Make sure to subscribe if you're new, if you wish to see more content. Love what you do, and as always folks, stay creative.